My name is Julian Arend. I'm Vice President of the Contract Faculty Unit of CUPE 3903 in Toronto.
And how many workers is that, and what kind of work do you do?
We have 3,000 odd members in our local, and my unit has just about 1,000 members. We are the contract faculty, that is people who are not students who do teaching at the university level. So we're course directors, we run tutorials as well, and we do other teaching assignments at the university. Usually the term adjunct is used in the States, I guess, for what we do. We're on 4-month or 8-month contracts. So every 4 or 8 months, depending, you have to reapply for the same job, regardless of how many times you've taught it.
My name is Gizem Chakmak. I'm the rank and file co-chair of the strike committee of CUPE 3903. I'm myself as a PhD student and a TA, what we call the Unit 1. And like Julian said, we have about 3,000 members, and about 1,400 of it is in my unit, TAs.
Why did you feel that you had to go on strike?
We were put in a position where the employer was consistently asking for concessions in this round of bargaining. They'd refused to bargain with us and presented concessionary offer after concessionary offer after concessionary offer, and refused to come to the table and actually deal with it. And so they basically engineered us into a position where we had to walk the lines in order to protect our workers, in order to protect our contracts, and in order to make sure that the standards of the university that we work at are in fact protected.
Is this your first strike?
This is my 3rd strike.
And the situation of adjuncts, graduate students, is very difficult, both in Canada and the United States. What are the conditions of your members?
Well, it kind of depends on which group that you're talking about. So when you look at our demands for this round of bargaining, for contract faculty, what we're arguing is for job security. As Julian said, we have a bunch of proposals that actually tries to address this position of precarity in contract faculty. For graduate students that may or may not be, they might be TAs, they might be GAs, what we call the graduate assistants. We want predictable and stable funding for people so that they would be able to continue their studies without worrying about if they can survive or not.
And the union, CUPE, is a national union. How many members does it have?
I actually don't know how many members. It's a very large union. It's a Canadian Union of Public Employees, so it encompasses a number of public institutions, government workers as well in certain sectors. It encompasses university workers, health workers, et cetera, et cetera.
And one of the issues facing workers in the United States and Canada is privatization, outsourcing. Is that an issue in your struggle?
Well, our union doesn't necessarily directly deal with outsourcing, but in the case of contract faculty, of course, there's the problem of not having job security, so you don't necessarily know if you're going to be hired from contract to contract. So you have a contract for 8 months, and you might be working at your university for 20 years, and you still don't know next year from year to year that you're going to have a job or not. When you don't get a contract, it might be that someone else outside of the union might be getting that job. For graduate students, it's a little bit different because thanks to our union's previous struggles, we have something called a minimum guarantee. So people who get into PhD are guaranteed a certain year of funding, which is also something that York is trying to do to change. So our struggle kind of encompasses all these attacks on our limited amount of security so that we can continue our studies.
And the issue of temporary workforce. I mean, large numbers of workers in this area are now temporary workers, and they have no stability. They're, in a very difficult strait. Is that an issue in your struggle?
Absolutely. That's what my unit is actually facing, is we are temporary workers by definition. We work year to year, term to term, contract to contract. The university is increasing its reliance on workers of that sort, so that at this point, prior to our strike, we did the calculations, and we teach about, 60-odd% of the courses at this university are taught by temporary workers. And so our struggle as a union is trying to not necessarily make their work permanent, but stabilize it so that at least those temporary workers who are doing the same teaching, the same research, the same publications, the same service work as the so-called full-time employees. Often some of our members teach significantly higher loads than so-called full-time members. So we're working towards trying to sort of regularize their employment to the extent that we're fighting against that precarity, we're fighting against that move towards temporary work, yeah.
So, I mean, equal work for equal pay?
Exactly. In fact, Ontario passed a law about equal work for equal pay and somehow managed to exclude the education sector last year.
So a lot of members are pretty unhappy about that.
Yes, yes.
Talk about how you organized. Your chair of a rank and file strike committee. What is that, and how have you organized for the struggle?
So like I said, I'm the rank and file co-chair of the strike committee. So in the case of a strike, well, we normally have our stewards council. So in the case of our workplace, the university, we have departments. So we are recruiting members who are representing their departments. Once a month, we have meetings, so we get updates. These members are usually the members who are more familiar with our collective agreement, how the university works. So they alert us to some of the problems that they face in their departments. And in the case of a strike or bargaining, that council becomes the strike committee that runs the strike. So we're the group that actually undertakes the logistics, day-to-day logistics of the strike. And because we're a member-driven union, we're a bottom to top kind of organizing union. Our chief stewards, who are elected members of our executive, they chair this committee, but there's also a rank and file co-chair that represents the interest of the rank and file in this process.
How does that mean? Because in the United States, most of the unions are top-down, kind of corporate type unions. Why and how did you get established to be more of a rank and file controlled union?
Partially our history as an academic union that was started by and heavily populated by socialists and leftists and Marxists and anarchists. So that history of sort of ground up organizing has long been a part of CUPE 3903. I'm not going to call us necessarily an anarchist or socialist union per se, although many of us have those leanings, but that legacy has left its mark on our union. So we really believe in bottom-up organizing. The executive has very limited power, even though according to CUPE's national bylaws, they're supposed to have, determinate power. We've long determined that the general membership meeting, for example, is the place where decisions are made. So the executive is directed by the members to take certain actions. The executive operates more in a managerial sense of taking care of the day-to-day logistics, but in terms of policy decisions and major decisions, we take those to membership meetings, and the membership decides en masse what we're going to do, and then we determine how to do that, how to achieve those goals.
Now, on the discussion on this strike, how were the members involved, and was there opposition to going on strike?
Well, you can never, in any organization, even as a leftist union, you can never have 100% approval of whatever process you're going through. There is opposition, and there are people even who are pro-strike. They cultivate different strategies for how to carry on the strike. But this is my second strike. I've only been here for 6 years, but I would say that this is the strongest that I've seen in my union. The participation from the membership is the highest. And for example, we had this process of forced ratification vote. Basically, what our employer did is they went around our executive and our bargaining team and forced a vote on us. They took their
Is that legal?
That is unfortunately legal in Ontario, yes. They can only do it one time in the case of a contract negotiations. So what they did is they took their concessionary deal directly to the membership, arguing that these radical executive members and bargaining team members were kind of blocking the way of negotiation happening. So they said, if we take this deal to the membership, they're going to agree because these people are not radical. We said no with an 86%, and I believe the rate of participation was around also 87% of the membership voted in this vote. So I am very happy to say the membership has been very supportive of this strike.
And the corporate media, they kind of portrayed you as intransigent. You're not willing to negotiate. I mean, what is your response to that, and what is kind of an attack that they've made on your worker in the unions?
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, they are corporate institutions, and the people running our university think this is a corporate institution, so they tend to think alike, and they tend to ally with a certain kind of discourse on.
They have the same agenda.
They have the same agenda. There are also deep ties between the York University Board of Governors and the governing provincial parties, some of the provincial opposition parties, the Conservative Party, as well as members of the media. Bell Media, which is one of the huge Canadian conglomerates that runs 2/3 of the media in this country, is deeply entrenched with York University's governance structures. They have given honorary degrees to reporters who then cover our strike negatively. It's all intermeshed. So we are basically, little David fighting this monster Goliath media empire where whatever they say goes out to every media outlet, Bell Media outlet, and is reported as fact, for example, whereas what we say gets buried. We have the reporters come, we have the reporters interview us, and they'll take one line out of a 5-paragraph response, or a half-hour interview will merit 30 seconds of clipped responses that actually don't say anything that we said. So it's an uphill battle in that sense. We've been burying them in social media, though. Our social media team has been really effective because we've bypassed those corporate media structures and gone directly to the people. And so we've seen great success in that. But it's been a real challenge dealing with the corporate media because their agenda is to promote other institutions that operate like they do.
And what are they saying about your union and your membership?
So I'm actually one of those social media people who are closely following what's out there about our union. Is that like I said, one of the arguments that's being articulated is that these radical people, they're not in the business of actually negotiating. I believe one of the corporate media accounts of our union last week called us a union working towards a socialist utopia. I myself think it's at best a social democratic utopia because we think workers who do most of the teaching at this university should have a say about how this university is run. One, in the sense that obviously we're not trying to get into like administration's ranks or whatever, but job security is that like I'm teaching at this university, I should have a right to claim some security. So one of the things is that radicals, they don't even want to negotiate. The other thing is that we're greedy because we there ask a wage increase that's slightly above the inflation rate in Ontario and in Toronto, which is one of the most expensive cities in North America. And another thing is we don't necessarily understand what we're asking, so the things they're asking are actually out of the scope of what the union can argue, that we're trying to do something that we're not legally allowed to do, which is also absolutely not true. So that's kind of the message that is being given. Radicals, they don't even know what they're doing, they just love fighting, and they're trying to take this university down. There's also this rhetoric of like, because you go on strike a lot, people are not going to start coming to York University, so it's going to be even bad for you because less students, less jobs for contract faculty, people are not going to be hired. So there's this vicious, as if we put this university in a vicious circle.
The government, I mean, corporations, there was a guy that ran for prime minister from Walmart. They would like to replicate what's going on in the United States with open shop. And is that going on here in Ontario? Is that they're trying to really break the unions and get rid of unions?
The government that just exited, not so much. They weren't friendly, but they weren't actively hostile. The party that's currently leading in the polls is actively hostile to organized labor, to workers' rights of any sort. They would be more than happy to bring in things like right to work, right? We already have in Ontario law things that resemble right to work in that we cannot actually remove people who are doing the work from our bargaining units. Even if they're kicked out of the union, they still have to have all the benefits and all the rights and respond. So it's a challenge, I think, with the rightward shift in governance in Ontario and the impending election where we probably will see a right-wing candidate come in. We're going to have a hard fight ahead of us. That's going to happen in June. But I want to make one more point to what Gizem was saying, and that is that they portray us as greedy, right? What doesn't get out is the vast majority of our 3,000 members, fewer than 400 work above the poverty line. Like, these are people who have spent their entire careers developing advanced education degrees, getting experience, working elsewhere, working here, and yet the vast majority of our members teaching university courses are working below the poverty line. I used to work as a bartender for a lot of years. I put myself through university working as a bartender. I knew that if I came to work and I did my job well, I'd have a job the next day. That's more than I can say for here after 3 degrees and over a decade of experience.
And you're professional workers. I mean, you're highly trained, masters, PhDs. It seems like they don't value that very much.
They don't, and they've made that very clear. They've made it clear that they consider us as a kind of corollary to the university's operations. We don't matter. We're just there.
Expendable.
Expendable labor, absolutely. And yet, when we withdraw our labor, they freak out. So they can't really have it both ways.
And they're trying to pit the students against you. They're saying the students are being disrupted.
They're absolutely trying to do that. One of the things that they're trying to push in the media is that like the union doesn't care about the students. The union actually just cares about itself and its members, and alongside like 60,000 students are suffering. One thing I always say when people push arguments like that is that I myself am a student of this university. I'm not an undergraduate student, but I'm a graduate student. I pay tuition to this university. I actually pay tuition so that I can continue working in this university. And another point, I would say that a strike is not necessarily easy on our members either. All of us would like to go back to teaching this moment. We need our employer to come back to the table and end this. Nobody actually enjoys striking. We would much rather be in the classroom, right? Because we got into this education, we got into this teaching situation because we love our students and we love teaching. And part of the reason that keeps us going is that this is part of the broader struggle against corporatization of the university. They're trying to push this agenda as education is just a service. It's just, we're just running a business here. It's something that you purchase, and it's not necessarily about your personal growth. And we are people who are opposing that view. We care about these people. That's why we want to keep this university an equitable, accessible place that everybody can actually access education, whether they're rich or not.
And kind of the commodification of education, and make it
The corporate model for this university is even more egregious because it is a public institution. It is publicly funded. It is in fact registered in Ontario by the act that created it as a charity, which means it's tax exempt. So taxpayer dollars are going in. No taxpayer dollars are coming out of this university. They have all these commercial projects and building projects and development projects that are raking in all this cash, none of which goes back into the tax coffers. And yet it's publicly funded. We have administrators with six-figure salaries in the mid 300 to 400 range, right? Telling people who are making $20,000 a year, get back to work, you bums, you're greedy, because you want a 2% wage increase. We have a university that drives us out on strike, that prolongs the strike by refusing to come and negotiate with us, and then says you're holding students hostage when we're the ones that are continually asking them, come back to the table and negotiate. You have a university that when they put us in that position and put the undergraduate students in that position, they say, fine, you're not coming back, we're canceling the summer term, we're canceling the winter courses, your members won't have any work. What about the students who are registered? Oh, we'll keep their money. We'll offer them a credit if they come back next year, maybe. Oh, what about the ones that can't get the credit? Oh, we'll just input fake grades into the system so that they can finish and move on. They have a policy of inputting invented fake grades into students' accounts. And they're okay with that. And yet they call us opponents of academic integrity. They call us opponents of academic standards. It's completely topsy-turvy and ludicrous.
And the wealth of Ontario. Ontario seems to be booming. A lot of money. I mean, condos. I mean, there's a lot of money in Ontario, yet it doesn't seem like the workers, the public workers, are getting a share of that.
Absolutely not. As I said, the vast majority of our members make below what is considered poverty line in Ontario. And while we're not necessarily okay with that, we recognize that those are the contracts we have. But that doesn't prevent us from thinking it's quite fair to ask for a little bit more so that our members don't struggle. Nobody is determined to be poor, right? And so that's part of what the struggle is recognizing the value of the work that we do and getting the university system, the education and ministerial system, and the general public to understand that what we do has value and that what we do is important to the booming economy of this province. The college workers recently were legislated back to work. They were legislated back to work because the government admitted that their strike was impacting the economy of Ontario. That was the justification for legislating them back to work. They tried that on us, but deliberately ran out of time, right, to get away from it. But anyway, that's a long story.
And
too.
the NDP opposed it?
The NDP didn't necessarily, they didn't get to oppose it. They refused to give the unanimous consent that was necessary to move it through the House expeditiously. So basically, by saying we're not going to consent, they prevented the vote from ever happening.
And this takes place in the framework of global capitalism, what's happening in the economy worldwide, Trumpism, which is not just in the United States but around the world, militarization, war, more money going to militarization, both in the United States, Canada. What's your union's position? What's your view on what's happening with the world situation and these governments in the United States?
So I don't necessarily know if I can say about like the official position of the union, but like Julian said, we are mostly leftist-leaning students, leftist-leaning academics who are opposing the anti-democratic practices that are spreading all over the world. And while I cannot claim that everybody is against capitalism, there are certainly members like that, but officially I think the union would argue that whatever economic system we're living in, the workers are the workers are entitled to kind of getting the benefits, getting the results of their labors. So, for example, in our university, we put 60% of the work in, we do 60%, more than 60% of the teaching, but whereas the part of the budget that we're getting is significantly less than that. So you don't necessarily have to be an anarchist, a socialist to realize that this is actually a very unjust system. Wealth inequality is growing everywhere, so our union is working to, within our constraints, is remedy this situation for our members and for the broader community.
One of the things about our union is that it is and has been for a long time an activist-based union.
Yeah.
So while we as a unit are limited to really effective work in terms of our scope, right, our labor, we also have members who are active in a number of different activist organizations across the city, the country, globally as well, that are actively opposing the march of corporatism, the march of capitalism, the march of neoliberal racist Trumpism, and that kind of stuff. So we are an activist union. For example, part of our union was supportive of the undergraduate program to get York University to divest its investments from weapons makers, right? Because they were heavily invested in the war machine, using public money and student money, right? And so the students said no, and we supported that, and we use our resources, our intellectual resources, our experience, and our bodies as well to go out there and help out with other programs besides simply labor issues. So it's broad-based, and there are a number of different causes that we work with.
And Israel?
The undergraduate students have a strong boycott and divestment and sanctions movement going at York University. Our union is split on that based on our membership, but in general the union is supportive of social justice issues, and that's one of those that a number of members of the union and certainly many members of the executive are fully supportive of.
And the issue of the war machine in the United States, they increased the military budget, Trump $70 billion, the Democrats and Republicans both voted for that. Trillions are being spent for war. Is that an issue for your local and CUPE nationally? I mean, in the United States, the AFL-CIO basically no comment. They're not opposing the trillions going for war. Is that an issue in your national union in the election?
The national union, not so much that I've seen personally. However, I think that also has to do with the fact that because it represents government workers and we have a generally government-run contract system, it becomes problematic to start addressing a number of the specific policies that any individual government will have. So that's a weakness in the national union because that national union represents so many diverse types of workers in public institutions. Our local is militantly opposed to militarism. I can say that.
And I'm an international student from the Middle East, so I can personally say that there's a significant group of international students who came to Canada for a search of better future, who fled these Middle Eastern countries directly affected by the aggressive militarism of the United States or the allies of the United States. And most of these people are coming from working class backgrounds, and because of our union's wins in the past, that because we have a union that support these communities and speak out for these social justice issues, that they feel at home, that they feel like they belong in this university and they feel safe. So for me, that was a determining factor to come to York University, actually.
And the issue of media, I mean, there is no national labor channel in Canada. There's no national labor channel in the United States. There's an ideological political attack against labor. Yet labor seems nationally and both internationally unable to respond to educate people about these issues, in-depth education. You think that the labor movement has to have more of a strategy towards developing labor channels and international labor media?
Absolutely. I mean, that on the one hand, that's an issue of funding, right? Because running a media organization is expensive. On the other hand, it's also an issue of engagement and education, particularly political education. And that's one of the places where we as a union think that we can contribute to that, is developing political consciousness among not only our members but also our students, because it's that generation that's going to have to deal with the mess that our forebears and we are leaving them in terms of labor relations and labor rights, right? So developing this kind of grassroots political consciousness, but also developing an educated political consciousness, will allow people to change their societies in some ways, right? To be at least make people aware of labor issues and why they're important to non-unionized workers. What is it that unions do that benefit non-unionized workers? Why should non-unionized workers want to be in a union? And even if they're not in a union, why would they not want to support a union, right? So giving concrete reasons why this happened at the grassroots level, at the educational level, at the school level, at the university level, is part of what we we want to do, and that's part of developing the kind of national consciousness of labor that will allow something like a labor channel to actually exist and have support and funding. For now, I mean, excuse me, said she's on our social media team. We've been operating heavily on social media because it is a way to kind of bypass those corporate controlled entities and those corporate controlled media outlets that shift the message in their favor. They also have unionized newsrooms where they're fighting with their unions, right? So
They're trying to destroy their media unions. They're under attack. Journalists and
it's catch-22 for them. So of course they're not going to promote any kind of labor issues or they're going to have negative coverage of labor. So we've been trying to use social media and individual education programs, grassroots outreach programs, engagement with local activist groups, right, to develop that kind of relationship between organized labor, which is usually seen as something out there to activists, right? But organized labor and community activism and social activism all coming together in a way that will then, mutually cross-pollinate ideas and bring us out of this kind of divided funk that we're in right now.
And CUPE is an important union in Canada. And actually, they've organized a national campaign against privatization, which the unions in the United States have been unable to do. How has CUPE, as a national union, supported your struggle?
The strike, our national union and our provincial union as well have been really supportive. In addition to helping us strike because they pay our strike pay that comes from the dues that we previously paid.
How much is your strike pay?
Well, if I pick it 20 hours a week, I get $300 a week. That's up to $300. We can get partial pay as well. Like I said, that strike budget comes from the dues that workers in that union previously paid. That's a strong tool that we have by virtue of having a national union. And the other thing is, that media thing was actually a really good point because as an individual union, as a small local, we actually don't have that kind of budget to launch a campaign, but CUPE National and CUPE Ontario has been helping us with our media budget. They've been publicizing our missives that have been going out. And because they're known entities that speak to the public, that they educate the public, them speaking in favor of our strike, kind of carrying the message to a greater public than bigger than your community has also been really effective for us. Regularly, representatives of different levels of the union come to our picket lines. They mobilize our other national unions, labor groups to rally support for us. Last week, I believe, we had a day of action. So all over Ontario, workers of different units actually came down to our picket lines, and we were able to hold hard pickets that basically shut down this university. And that was an effort to show York University that this is the effect when we withdraw our labor. This is the effect when these people put their minds. This is how important we are to this community, but you're denying us that importance. You're denying us that importance to our labor. Sorry, I apologize. So that was a really heartening moment for me that people all over Ontario came to us to support us, and that was initiated by Ontario Federation of Labour and CUPE Ontario.
So one of the issues that has come up here is that management and other people are pushing for arbitration. And what is the position of your union and your view of that?
As a union, we are opposed to arbitration for a number of reasons. We're opposed to arbitration because it's taking our contract's futures and putting it in the hands of a third party that doesn't actually have any grounding in those issues, that isn't connected to the specific issues in our contract, and so will essentially offer a random approach to what appear to be just numbers, shifting numbers around, where in fact most of our issues are non-monetary issues. They're governance issues, they're academic issues, and they're also specific language issues of clauses that affect how our work is done. Right? And something that many arbitrators have demonstrated that they don't understand already. So we're opposed to it for that reason. We're also opposed to the administration's constant calls for binding arbitration because in the Canadian context, binding arbitration is supposed to be the last resort when extended bargaining fails. They called for arbitration on the first day of bargaining. They didn't even bother to negotiate with us. They just said, here's our package. Our package is these three things. Everything else goes to arbitration. And we said, well, let's bargain. And they said, no, arbitration. And we said, let's bargain. And they said, no, arbitration. So we said, okay, we'll reduce our package significantly. Here, try this. Let's bargain with this. No, our package is the same, arbitration. And that was the continuing mantra throughout 6 months of bargaining. They stonewalled and just said arbitration, arbitration. So at this point, we have to recognize that arbitration is the hammer that they want to use to bust us. So we're not going to accept that.
And the corporate media is using that. You don't want to arbitrate.
I mean, that's exactly the point, right? And yes, our union is against arbitration because we believe that a deal should be reached at the bargaining table. It's our constitutional right to have bargaining. Our union has not been able to bargain with its employer. Like Julian said, like from the first day on, they said like arbitration. This is an impasse. Nothing is going to be resolved at the bargaining table. We have been on strike for 11 weeks. We had a day of bargaining. So bargaining has not been exhausted. Our charter right, our constitutional right to bargain, to political expression, is being oppressed. And also our union doesn't want to create this precedent that employers do not have to bargain. They just have to wait out unions, force them out on strike, wait until their membership is tired and cannot take it anymore. They have financial difficulties, so they have to settle. So all employers have to do from now on is to wait unions out. We don't want to create that precedence. So that's also, in addition to the social justice issues that we want to put forward in our bargaining, advocating for our members, we also don't want to create that. Employers have to bargain. They cannot bypass the bargain.
It sounds like you've got a very strong union here, a really strong workforce.
We have a strong union. We have been a strong union for a long time. The employer likes to make a big deal of the fact that this is the fourth strike in 6 rounds of bargaining. Yeah, it is. And it might be the 5th strike in 7 rounds of bargaining next time if they don't actually shape up and start listening to us. We have a strong union that has always worked hard for our members, and our members respond by coming out en masse. So we're confident in where we are. We're confident that we're in the right, and we're confident that we can negotiate a good, fair settlement for our members. And if the administration of the university is willing to do that, great. If they're not, we'll see them on the picket lines. But it is important, again, as Gizem said, to connect what we're doing here in terms of precarity to other precarious types of labor. Academic labor is not privileged when it's precarious. It's exactly the same as any other job. We've all done other jobs that have been precarious, and we all know that making a little bit of money here and losing your job is no different than making a little bit of money here and losing your job, regardless of how many letters you have after your name. The point is, we want people of all organizations, of all forms of labor, to have stable, solid, predictable employment, and that includes us. And so that's part of our larger campaign.
And what can people do who want to support your struggle?
Well, we always appreciate people kind of getting the message out. If they use social media, they can plug into our Facebook group, Facebook page, our Twitter. We regularly tweet updates, what's happening in our union, because unlike our employer, we're actually very transparent. Getting the message out, definitely. Kind of educating their own communities about what's happening to education, commodification of education is an important thing for us. Kind of battling this message of like greedy 3,000 something workers are trying to take this university down. For organized labor, for organizations, we accept donations.